Anyway, tonight also, the topic of tonight, last week we talked about scaling from photographs, and that's where we had all the fun with parallax. Thankfully, we will not have to deal with parallax with the chair. Since we're not going to be using photographs this time, which require the lens of the camera, which creates the parallax effect, since we're now dealing with a physical 3D model and we will not have to worry about parallax because the parallax is a deformation created by the round lens of the camera. So now we're literally not going to have to deal with it, and this is where the fun starts.
Couldn't we just print that really, really big?
Yes, if you have got $1,500 worth of filaments and 6 months to waste, you can scale this using the same method we're going to use tonight to scale it in your computer and then chop it to fit your bed and then spend the next 6 months printing it. And that is a totally viable option.
Not guaranteed to hold your butt off the ground.
No, if you print it right, I bet you this would hold you. So we will be scaling this. The same technique we are going to be doing on this scaling, we can also use for models. Sometimes models are a great reference because if the modeler or the company who created the model has the proper access when they're licensed, usually they do have archival access at Lucasfilm to get into the archives. Even now they're doing 3D scans of original props to reproduce. They have access to go in and look at the archives, look at photographs that you and I will never get to see, look at things that you got a white glove. But the 3D scanning process is actually really cool for modelers because nothing actually touches the model. Once you set the model up, the scanner will scan it and create a 3D image of it. Then they could reproduce. On today's resin printers, they can reproduce almost perfect copies of things. And then they can play with scaling and all the other things. And it's a really cool time that we live in now because back in the old days, if they were going to do like a Y-wing, you have the screen filmed Y-wings. They were probably about 18 inches long, and they were kit bashed, and those were tank parts, model kit parts of all different shapes and sizes. They would have to reproduce those parts by sculpting those parts in a smaller scale. Nowadays, with 3D scanning, you can scale those parts to a new scale and have perfect copies in a different size of those parts to make a more accurate model. And I think that's really cool stuff. Reason why I'm using the chair is this 3D model, this is not the actual one. Joe actually has the actual one we used when we built the chair. But our Emperor's throne was used. No one has ever, I don't know if the original throne even exists. There's no way to get measurements of it. We're not actually talking about the detailing on the chair itself. We're talking about the frame and the construction of the chair, getting this to life size in the accurate proportions. And the reason why we use this chair is there's actually several other chairs available, but this one had the right look and feel. This really looks like the Emperor's throne. Dimensional wise, it's just spot on. It looks wonderful. So we use this as our model to scale off of. And we're going to go over another technique that we used, another scaling technique that is available to anyone out there that we actually used during the creation of the chair. And we'll get to that after we go through a little bit of scaling on the chair itself. First thing you got to do when you want to build something, having a 3D model, 3D printing has just made model making, especially like large scale model making, a lot easier. It's easier when you have a physical thing in your hand that you can model off of. And when I was a kid, we went to Mount Rushmore. And if anyone ever has been to Mount Rushmore, there in the museum center part of Mount Rushmore, they have the original sculpt of Mount Rushmore, the way they were intending to make it. That sculpt, that original sculpture that they made was used to scale from the sculpture to the full-size carvings on the mountainside. And how they did that is they had, on the mountain, they erected an identical rig that brought a arm that went out and around it, would go all the way around, and they would drop a plumb bob on the model, and then they would measure and scale up the measurements, because whatever the model was fairly big, actually. I think the model was like 10 foot wide and so many feet tall. So whatever scale the model was, they used that scaling to multiply all of their markings on the arm as it went out, and then how far down the string went with the plumb bob, like how far out to the tip of the nose on George Washington, something like that. And they could use that to get their roughing shapes, and then they would use that for finer. They would do maybe 30, 40 measurements just on George Washington's nose to get the nostrils and everything correct. And they would drill and then hammer down to those depths and then smooth everything together. So it was a cool process, and that is the exact same process you would use to scale this to a full-size throne. Last week we talked about reference. We need a reference. Last week we used some real-life pieces from an actual gun that we need to scale up. We used the grips as our reference measurements. We measured the grip and we scaled that up to where we could get an accurate formula for scaling up the picture that we had. Now, on this chair, we don't have any references. When we originally started on the chair, we did not have an original part of the chair. Later on during the construction of the chair, we found some photographs that actually gave us one piece that we actually had here in the shop that was a detail piece on the chair. But when we started, we didn't have that. And the piece is that piece right here that sticks out. That is actually a crankshaft piece from the Revell Visible Engine Kit.
That's right. Always scale from your Revell engine kit.
Well, you know what? Here's the funny thing. Mauser pistols are very easy to get a hold of them. You can get a Denix. You can call me up for $25. You can get a resin copy of a Denix. The Denix is a very good, accurate starting point, and it's kind of like the standard in the community for Mausers.
So is that our new measurement, or it's
No.
5 Denixes tall?
No, that's not the measure. But if you were wanting to scale and create a Mauser from scratch, if, say, Mausers were not that common, which they are, but if they were not, and you had to do it like we were doing for the Ben Kenobi blaster, the Revell engine pieces would be the perfect place to start, because you can go and buy that kit today and take those pistons, measure the pistons, and use those as reference to scale the rest of the gun. That is exactly like we were doing, except for I had real grips for the gun. On this, we don't have any reference. We have to find some sort of reference for this particular item. What we decided was we needed one point of reference that we figured we would use is the standard height of the seat of a chair. Turns out that's 18 inches. So we used the distance from the base here to the cushions on the seat as 18 inches. So we measured this, we found out what the distance was. It was actually kind of easy, because with the base already on the chair, you can take your calipers and just go from the bottom of the stand to the base of the seat, and we have 1.41 inches. Now, 1.41 inches, if you remember last week, your reference point is 18 inches. For us, it's 18 inches. So I'll put 18 inches right down here. So you take your reference, which on this case is the distance between your butt to the floor, which would be 18 inches on a chair. You divide that by the measurement you take from your model or your photograph. This time it's a model. On this one, it would be, oh, I didn't lock it down, so here we go. 1.41 inches equals 12.77. On this, I always round up. I only go 2 decimal points deep. So the third decimal point, if it's over 5, I round up. If it's below 5, I just leave it. So where we're at is 12.77. You go to check your math. The measurement times your key, and 12.77 is the key. I take the measurement, which is 1.41 times 12.77 equals and that gives me 18 inches, 18.0057. So technically it would be 18.01. I'm there. I'm happy to work with that. So my scaling, the key to scale this model is 12.77 inches. So whenever I make a measurement from now on, like if I want to measure the width of the chair, that is 4.73. 4.73 times the key, which is 12.77, and that equals 60.4 inches. And actually, that's really good because 5 years ago, when I scaled this thing, look at that. 60 inches. I rounded the width to 60 inches. It still works because I got the actual one of the pieces we're going to talk about here in the future, but that's how you scale. And I want to talk about real quick, go ahead and pull up our ATST toy. If you ever had the desire to create a full-sized ATST, we actually have this dream. This is one of our big dreams. And we had a long discussion about this. The toy itself has some interesting engineering already created for it. The reason why I'm saying that is, if you look at the original ATST from Return of the Jedi, the feet are very small and it's a little bit taller. And it's not in the same, it's not in a stance similar to the toy. And what we kind of realized was the toy designers had to take and design the ATST Walker toy to be able to stand on its own without falling over. So they moved the center of gravity, they enlarged the feet, they did all kinds of things that would actually benefit someone who wanted to create a full-scale one, because what they did was they made the design a little more practical for a freestanding prop. Because it's a freestanding toy, they had to do it with the head being as heavy as it is. If you were going to build a real live one, it's going to be super tall and you want to make the head as light as possible. So you actually get a benefit of it's rebalanced and it has bigger feet, which would make it more stable. And if you built it in real life, you would build the head much lighter than the toy head would have been. And it even makes it even more stable. If you wanted to scale that toy, we don't have one down here. We were going to have a toy down here tonight, but I forgot to grab something. And the only thing I could think of is I have some Black Series. I have a couple Black Series speeder bike sets that some people have gifted me over the years because of the speeder bike pit crew and all that. I was going to break one of those open and have a speeder bike down here, and I just didn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to open those boxes. So we just pulled up the ATST because we have, in this right here, we actually have blueprints for that, or drawings of our own and scaling numbers of our own. So anyway, before the show started, we went to Wikipedia and found out that the ATST is 9.04 meters tall. And Rodney took that, and that's 29.66 feet tall, and we turned it into inches because it's easier to do the math in inches when you're going to measure it in inches, and then once you have it in inches, you can go ahead and break it back down into feet. But it's always easier to work in inches right off the bat.
Because being Americans, we do not believe in the metric system.
To be honest, it's actually easier to do all this in metric. Metric just lends itself more to it. But the reason why I don't do it in metric is because a lot of the items I have around here are standard, and like bolts, nuts, bolts, and if I'm using a reference piece, and a lot of these props were actually made with standard measurements. So this being 60 inches wide makes total sense to me. And no, it's not a weird number. It ends up being like a whole number. So if you wanted to scale that toy, your starting reference for the toy would be its height. So you would measure from the bottom of the feet to the top of the head. You would get whatever your number was, which is the formula, your reference number, which in this case is 9.04 meters, broken down to 355.92 inches. And 355.92 inches is your reference number. So you would take the 355.92 and divide it by whatever measurement the toy height was, and that gives you your key. And from that point on, and you don't have to worry about, get ready, you don't have to worry about parallax because because we're dealing with a real physical model or a real physical toy. Once you have this physical thing in your hand, you don't have to worry about parallax anymore. So if you were going to be scaling a toy ATST, we've done the research. Wikipedia, which is, we know, is a valid source, reference source, that the ATST is 9.04 meters tall. You break that down, that's 29.66 feet. You break that down to inches, that's 355.92 inches. So you will work with 355.92 inches divided by your measured height of your toy. That answer, whatever your answer is, that will be your key. And from that point on, if you measure the width of the head, multiply it by the key, and that will equal how big it would be in real life. And that is how you scale a model like this. We've already done all the work. We actually know that with the hatch open, the ATST is well over 30 feet tall. And we plan to have our hatch open because we're going to have a mannequin sticking out the top. Since we're talking about, part of this subject is 3D prints. You can take the model that you've decided on, and like I said, you need to do referencing your model. You find a model, pull it up. I do this all the time. I'll have the model up on my screen on the left side, and I'll have screen grabs on the right side of my monitor, and I'm looking at all the detail. I'm trying to match detail, make sure it has the detail. On the chair, the detail's not that important. It is important when you go to finish it, but the real thing about the chair is the shape. There are a lot of great constructions of Emperor's Thrones out there, and then there's a lot of them that just, you kind of look at it and you're like, there's just something wrong. You may not even know what it is, and you may not even be able to figure it out, but proportionally, something is wrong. We use this one because looking at it, it's proportionally correct, or at least to the eye, it's proportionally correct. It looks right. It looks like that's the actual thing. And I believe, like I said, this was a Sideshow scan, a scan of a Sideshow 1/6 Emperor's Throne and Emperor, I think is what this was. So someone scanned it and then scaled it. It is a different scale. So now that we know how to do this, or now that we've talked about and figured, we've gone through the scaling process, and obviously reference on this one, you need a reference point. And the reference point on this one was 18 inches from butt to floor. Your reference, 18 inches divided by the measurement, which is the same distance between the butt and the floor. And we came up with 1.14. 18 divided by 1.14 equals 2.77. So everything that's done on this model from here on out, all measurements to create a blueprint to build this in physical reality, full scale, every measurement would be multiplied by 12.77. That's how we scaled this prop up from this little thing to a full size. Can't fit through any door in your house. Now, one thing that we did do, and we're going to talk about this, is we used an overhead projector to create some templates. This is something I learned and did when I was a kid. I actually created a wall size, about 12-foot long beam blueprint of the USS Arizona. It's got the internal beam structure of the ship, and it was taken from a book that had a photograph of the beam blueprints of the ship, and I copied it from that book onto a transparency, and using a overhead projector, projected it on the wall, and then using paper tablecloths taped to the wall, I hand traced or hand drew, following all the lines, a structural blueprint of the USS Arizona that hung on my wall in California. What we're going to talk about now is actually using an overhead projector, and actually we did some research. So if you're wondering how hard it is to find an overhead projector, it's actually not that hard. So we have a couple listings. We have a couple of these. This one's $30. I think the one behind us, Jeff bought the one behind us because we were talking about it, and Jeff's like, oh, that's cool, and he went and found us one. The one Jeff purchased is actually this exact same model right here that's coming up. This one right here. I think he paid 25 or 30 bucks for it. We bought a $10 bulb for it, and he put a $3 fan in it, or he replaced the fan in it. But using the overhead projector allowed us to make full-size templates. We created inside the chair, we created a frame system similar to like a boat. We had framing that went straight, and then we had framing that came off on the sides to make the sections that actually 1/4 inch or may have been 1/8 inch plywood was stapled to the outside of everything. We used thin plywood so it would follow the contour, and it was following the contour of the pieces that we made templates for. Let's fire this up real quick. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a few overhead projector slides that I created for this build. So in your 3D printer, you can pull up 3D prints. I used the NetFab, but you can pull up and use any 3D print software you want and take a screen grab of the print and then throw it into Paint and size it up whatever you want. With this model, we knew the distance between, say, the bottom here to the top here. So we could take these transparencies, and by taking the overhead projector and walking it back and forth, the closer you go, the smaller it gets, the further back, the bigger it gets. We were able to take pieces of paper and mark the height and then move back and forth until we got the actual image in that scaling or in that size range. And from then on, we just drew out a template and transferred that template directly to plywood and then cut it out and started creating our ribs. So I will show you right now. Go to camera 2, sir. Here's the base chair. And if you look right here, right off the bat, that is 60 inches from this point to this point. So that shows my scaling back then ends up being pretty much the same as the scaling I have now. If you look here, the distance between where the seat is to the bottom of the chair was 7.07 inches. We probably rounded that to 7 inches in the end. I also, for real quick, if anybody want to take a look, this is the formula, the reference, which would be 18 inches here, divided by the measurement, the distance between here and there. That same formula works here. You could do that exact same formula on this and just use this as a scaled picture. And since this is not a screen grab, a photograph, it's actually a copy of a 3D rendering, we do not have to worry about parallax. There's no need to worry about parallax because this is a flat, straight up reference of the actual piece. There's that. Now, these are the pieces we use to create templates. These are the ones we used to create the templates. This outline right along here is what we used. Actually, not this here. This is the cushions. This right here is what we used. And that's the outline we used. We made 2 of these, and this one right here is a different one. It's a little bit further out from that, and we also use that as a template for. And we only templated this there because we were creating this right here. So yeah, we use these 2 for that. And just for fun, really quick, the Mandalorian's blaster. This is the original Mandalorian. This is what the Mandalorian blaster is based on. The Bergmann Model 1. This is called the Bergmann Model 1. This particular Bergmann Model 1 is the French Trials version. Personally, I believe that we already know that they did not use a real Bergmann Model 1 in The Mandalorian. The only reason is because they're very rare and very expensive. So we know they made a copy of one. But we also know that they used, and it makes sense because the best reference photos of a Bergmann Model 1 are of the French Trials gun. This is the actual French trial gun. And the thing about the French trial gun is the cleaning rod was removed from the gun not long after the French trial gun was created. So having that there gives you another indicator that they used the French gun. So if I was recreating this gun, there's an article that tells you about the French trials, and they put in specs for the French trials, and the gun is 11 inches long. So if you wanted to scale this particular gun, you go from here to back here, 11 inches. And that is your reference to scale that picture. And this picture is much larger, giving you better detail. But you would do the exact same process to scale this one, although this would have a different reference key as this one here because their sizes are different. And of course, we have the above picture too. That's just for fun. This gives you an idea about what we were talking about last week on scaling guns. And this is just an on-screen example, as this is 11 inches long per what the measurements from the French trial were. And here's another fun thing. These are copies of a photograph. So what do we have to deal with? Everybody together? Parallax. These are also, even though these shots are very well done, they're not too close, they're not too far away, and they will give you very good dimensions. They're still subject to parallax. Any questions on the overhead projector? So anyway, I hope that's information. I would love to see somebody take this information and just say, I was inspired.